The silence in the room was so complete, you could hear the leather of boxing gloves creak. Muhammad Ali, the most famous fighter on the planet, stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on the smaller man in front of him. Bruce Lee had just requested that nobody in their right mind would make of the heavyweight champion. "Throw your hardest punch at me." It was 1970, and the private gym in Los Angeles had been closed to everyone except a handful of trusted witnesses. What transpired in the next 60 seconds would become one of the most debated moments in martial arts history, a story passed down through generations of fighters, each adding new details and new interpretations. But those who were actually there, those who saw what happened when Ali finally agreed to throw that punch, insisted the truth was more extraordinary than any embellishment. The meeting itself had been months in the making. Ali, recently returned to boxing after his suspension for refusing military service, was training in Los Angeles. Bruce Lee, rising fast in Hollywood but still years away from Enter the Dragon, had been studying footage of Ali with an intensity that worried his friends. Not to challenge him, Lee had explained, but to understand how a man that size could move like a lightweight. When they finally met, witnesses recalled, the contrast was almost comic. Ali is 6'3", over 200 pounds of sculpted muscle. Lee at 5'7", 140 pounds of coiled energy. Yet something in the way they carried themselves suggested these numbers were deceiving. Both men moved with the economy of true masters, every gesture deliberate, every stance perfectly balanced. The preliminary conversations had been careful, respectful. Both men understood they represented more than themselves. Ali carried the hopes of millions who saw him as more than a boxer. Lee was breaking barriers for Asian actors and martial artists in Western media. Neither wanted this meeting to become a spectacle or, worse, a genuine confrontation that could damage either of their careers. But as they talked, observers noticed a shift. The mutual respect was evident, but so was the curiosity. These were men who had dedicated their lives to understanding combat, to pushing the boundaries of what the human body could do. The theoretical discussions about timing, distance, and strategy gradually gave way to something more immediate. They wanted to see each other move. It started simply. Ali demonstrated his jab, that lightning-fast punch that had frustrated so many opponents. Lee watched with an intensity that those present found almost unnerving. He wasn't just observing the punch, he seemed to be absorbing something deeper, reading patterns invisible to everyone else. When Ali finished, Lee nodded slowly, as if confirming something he had suspected. Then Lee made his request. Not for a demonstration jab, but for Ali to throw a real punch, with real intention. The room, according to those present, went completely quiet. This wasn't how these meetings usually went. Demonstrations, yes. Light sparring, occasionally. But asking Muhammad Ali to throw a full-power punch at you? That seemed to cross a line from courage into something else entirely. Ali's initial response was a refusal. He understood better than most the damage his fists could do. He had seen strong men crumble from his punches, had felt bones break under his gloves. The idea of throwing such a punch at a man half his size, a fellow artist he respected, went against everything he believed about controlled violence. Fighting had rules, purposes, and limits. This request seemed to ignore all of them, but Lee persisted, and something in his calm certainty made Ali reconsider. This wasn't bravado, observers realized. Lee wasn't trying to prove his toughness or challenge Ali's power. He was completely serious about something he believed would demonstrate a principle that words couldn't adequately explain. After several minutes of discussion, Ali finally agreed, but with conditions. One punch. If anything went wrong, they stopped immediately. The preparation took several minutes. Those present recalled how the atmosphere changed, became charged with the kind of tension usually reserved for actual fights. But this was different. This was an experiment, though what kind of experiment, only Lee seemed to fully understand. He positioned himself carefully, not in any traditional fighting stance, but in something fluid, almost casual. Ali took his position, still reluctant but now committed. Those who knew him well recognized the signs of his concentration. Despite the unusual circumstances, he was treating this with the same seriousness he brought to any physical challenge. He wasn't going to insult Lee by throwing a half-hearted punch. If Lee wanted to experience Ali's power, he would get exactly that. The witnesses spread out, giving the two men room while maintaining clear sightlines. What they were about to see would be debated, analyzed, and mythologized for decades. But in that moment, they were simply observers of something unprecedented. Two masters of combat, testing principles that existed at the very edges of their arts. Lee gave a small nod, signaling his readiness. Ali, according to those watching, took a breath, set his feet, and began the motion that had ended so many fights. The punch started from his toes, traveled through his legs, rotated through his hips, and extended through his shoulder into his arm. It was a left cross, thrown with the perfect mechanics that had made Ali legendary. What happened next occurred so quickly that witnesses gave conflicting accounts, though they all agreed on the essential elements. Lee didn't dodge in any conventional sense. He didn't step back or sideways. Instead, he seemed to rotate slightly, a movement so small it was barely visible. His hand came up, not to block, but to redirect, making contact with Ali's forearm just enough to alter the punch's trajectory. But the truly extraordinary part, according to those present, was what Lee did simultaneously. As Ali's punch passed within inches of his head, Lee's other hand extended forward, stopping just short of Ali's jaw. It wasn't a counterpunch in any traditional sense. It was as if Lee had borrowed the energy of Ali's attack and redirected it back, arriving at his target at the exact moment Ali's punch reached full extension. The room remained frozen for a heartbeat. Ali's fist hung in the air where Lee's head had been a fraction of a second earlier. Lee's palm rested against Ali's jaw, gentle as a butterfly landing but unmistakably there. Both men were perfectly still, understanding that something remarkable had just occurred. Ali was the first to move, stepping back with an expression witnesses struggled to describe. It wasn't shock or anger or embarrassment. It was something closer to recognition, the look of someone who had just witnessed a fundamental principle they had never considered. "Do that again," he said, his voice carrying none of his usual showmanship. This was Ali the student, not Ali the entertainer. They repeated the exchange several times, with Ali throwing different punches at varying speeds. Each time, the result was similar. Lee would make minimal movements, small redirections that seemed to rob the punches of their danger, while simultaneously creating opportunities for counterstrikes. It wasn't about being faster than Ali. Nobody was faster than Ali. It was about understanding movement at a different level entirely. What struck observers most forcefully was how Lee never tried to match Ali's power. He never threw hard counterstrikes or attempted to prove he could hurt the larger man. Every movement was educational, demonstrative. He was teaching, not fighting, and Ali was absorbing the lessons with an intensity that surprised those who knew his usually playful demeanor. The principle Lee was demonstrating, witnesses later understood, went beyond simple self-defense. It was about efficiency, about using an opponent's commitment against them. Ali's punches were perfect for boxing, where opponents were similarly sized and operating under the same rules. But Lee was showing how those same perfect punches created vulnerabilities when the context changed. After perhaps 20 minutes of these exchanges, both men stepped back, breathing hard but energized. The conversation that followed, according to those present, was as remarkable as the physical demonstration. Ali asked detailed questions about the philosophy behind Lee's movements. How did he read the punches so early? Why did small redirections work better than solid blocks? How could defense and offense truly become one motion? Lee's explanations were patient and precise. He spoke about the concept of interception, about hitting an opponent not after they attacked, but while they were attacking. He discussed the water principle, how softness could defeat hardness by offering no resistance to overcome. Ali listened with the same focus he brought to studying boxing films, occasionally nodding or asking for clarification. What emerged from their discussion was a mutual recognition of complementary truths. Ali's boxing had reached the pinnacle of what was possible within its framework. His combination of size, speed, and ring intelligence was unprecedented. Li's martial arts explored different possibilities, ways of fighting that assumed no rules, no referee, no agreement between combatants about what was acceptable. Neither man claimed superiority for their approach. Those present emphasized this point repeatedly in later accounts. There was no moment where Li suggested he could beat Ali in a boxing match, no claim from Ali that his size and power made Li's techniques irrelevant. Instead, they discussed how principles from each art might inform the other. Ali spoke about the psychological aspect of combat, how he often won fights before throwing a punch by establishing mental dominance. Li found this fascinating, relating it to concepts from Chinese martial arts about defeating an opponent's spirit before engaging their body. They discovered parallels neither had expected, common ground between their vastly different approaches. As the session wound down, witnesses noticed both men seemed reluctant to end it. They had found in each other not a rival, but a fellow explorer, someone else pushing the boundaries of human combat potential. The respect was evident, but more than that, there was a kind of joy in discovering that their individual pursuits were part of something larger. The handshake that concluded their meeting was firm and prolonged. Both men understood they had participated in something special, a meeting that transcended sport or style. They had proven that mastery recognizes mastery, that true understanding comes not from defeating others, but from learning from them. In the years that followed, both men would reference this meeting in interviews, always with profound respect for the other. Ali would speak of Li's incredible precision and timing. Li would analyze Ali's footwork and psychological tactics in his writings. Neither ever claimed to be the superior fighter. Both seemed to understand that such claims missed the point entirely. The witnesses to that afternoon in 1970 carried with them a story that would grow in the telling. But those who were actually there insisted the truth needed no embellishment. They had seen two men at the peak of human physical achievement choose cooperation over competition, learning over ego. They had watched Ali throw his famous punch at a man half his size, only to discover that size and power were just variables in a much more complex equation. The lesson from that room wasn't about who was the better fighter. It was about how excellence manifests in different forms, how true masters remain students, how the greatest achievements in any field come from recognizing that there is always more to learn. When Muhammad Ali threw his hardest punch at Bruce Lee, what changed the room wasn't the punch or the defense. It was the recognition that both men were part of the same search for perfection, just following different paths. That moment when Lee's hand touched Ali's jaw while Ali's fist passed harmlessly by became more than just a martial arts demonstration. It became a symbol of how different philosophies could meet without conflict, how strength could acknowledge speed, how the West could learn from the East. In that gym, for that afternoon, two legends discovered they were both students in the same endless university of combat, each holding wisdom the other needed. The punch that Ali threw that day was caught not by a block or a dodge, but by understanding. And what Lee demonstrated wasn't superiority, but possibility. Together, they showed everyone in that room that mastery isn't about having all the answers. It's about never stopping the questions.